Welcome to the Morrison Report. Hosted by Deval Morrison, sales representative for Bosley Real Estate Limited Brokerage. Ms. Morrison has co-authored the best-selling book, Success Today, with Brian Tracy, and has been interviewed on NBC, ABC, and CBS affiliates by Bob Guinea from The Bachelor. Deval, a real estate investor, has spoken to many attendees at her real estate seminars and is currently ranked in the top 5% of agents in her brokerage. Join me in welcoming your host, Deval Morrison.
On today's episode, we have David Wenger, certified residential appraiser with Ridgepoint Appraisals. Welcome, David.
Hi, how are you doing?
Awesome. Thanks so much for joining us. Can you give us a little bit of information about how you got into the business and how long you've been doing this?
Well, I've been doing appraisals for about 10 years now. I actually, when I went to school, I was out in Concordia University. I studied finance there. And I was talking to one of my teachers, and I was interested in real estate, and he actually suggested that appraisals might be the way to go. So that's how I got my start. And When I went out to look for it, it took me about a week, and I was already an appraiser. So,
wow,
yeah.
You've been doing it for a really long time.
10 years is long enough to see a few things.
So, yeah, tell us some interesting stories then about what you've seen over the years.
I've seen a few things. I've had a roof collapse while I was at a house. I've seen some pretty devastating looking homes where. One house in particular that I always remember, it was like from my first year of appraising, this lady had boards like about a foot tall between every doorway.
Wow.
And I asked her, what's going on here? And she's like, well, it's just to keep out all the rats.
Oh,
and
gross. I
couldn't believe it. But I mean, as you go on and you kind of get numb to seeing all these different things, but you see a lot and it's interesting.
Right, absolutely. Now, do you see a lot of fraud in the marketplace?
It's hard to know. It's hard to know, like, when you see fraud, because on my end, all I see is really the transaction that's occurring. Mm-hmm. And all I can determine is, has this house sold for what the market says it's sold for,
yep,
or is it selling for more than the market sold for? So I can't really tell in the background if somebody's tried to inflate the value or not. It could be just, the buyer's not aware of what's going on in the market, so they've paid more.
Yep.
Versus, somebody's inflating the value to, serve their own purposes.
Perfect. So now walk us through some of the steps in terms of why are appraisers needed. So at what point does the bank call you? Do you want to walk us through that a little bit?
Sure. And I mean, I don't always know what their logic is for having the appraisal, but for the most part, I kind of consider it as like an insurance policy. The bank wants to know that this place is worth this much, because if it's not, then they shouldn't be lending the full amount of value on it, right?
Right.
So if the property sells for $500,000, but no other property is selling for that much, then the bank wants to know that, and in which case the buyer would have to make up for that difference.
Right.
In terms of just refinancing for a mortgage, the bank wants to know what the value is so that they can loan for the mortgage or for a line of credit, whatever it might be, what kind of loan that they're doing.
Right. Interesting. And so do you appraise condos as well as houses?
I do condos and houses, so anything residential. There's two different kinds of designations. There's commercial appraisers,
yep,
and then there's residential appraisers. And I'm a residential appraiser.
And so you would appraise things all over the city of Toronto, or are you in the 905 area as well?
I will do the 905, but typically I focus on Toronto. I live downtown, and I know the market, especially in certain areas downtown. So, I could travel out there, but with being so busy with properties downtown, it's just not worth going out there, really.
Right. No, that makes sense. Yeah. Absolutely. Now, with the extreme bidding wars that we've had this year in particular, mm-hmm, are you seeing houses that are not appraising, or is everything okay?
Every once in a while, because we have to go based on what's happened in the market. So it's almost like you're taking a look back. Mm-hmm. So you look at what properties have sold, and let's say everything's very similar. It's all bungalows. They're all in 25-foot lots, and they're all selling for, say, $750,000. Yep. When you get that one property that you go out to see, and it's $950,000, then you kind of have to dig deeper and see whether or not it truly is worth that much. Why would it go for, $200,000 more than everything else that's sold in the area, and for $200,000 less? So
right.
I can't say that there's been more, but it's definitely something I have to keep my eye open for, because in markets like these, there's definitely the opportunity to, inflate things.
Yeah.
So.
Nope, that makes sense. And then is there anything that consumers or real estate agents can do to sort of help you be able to do your job better when the bank does contact you to have an appraisal done?
Right. Yeah. I mean, realtors quite often will provide sales. That's always one thing. They can, help to understand what some comparables in the area would look like,
yep,
and how they compare to the subject.
Yep.
And when I say the subject, that's the home, the house that's being appraised.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of a homeowner, they can actually do the same thing. If they contacted a realtor, they could provide sales for that property, and every once in a while, some homeowners will do that as well.
Right.
Also, what helps is just telling the appraiser what you've done since you purchased the property last.
Okay. So they can tell them about the improvements.
Yeah, exactly. Because it's, and there's stuff that you don't always notice, right? So, maybe you put in in-floor heating into the basement. I might not be able to notice that from the last time you purchased it.
Right.
So, or built-in sprinklers, putting in insulation in, changing the roof, changing windows, and even renovations at times. It's hard to tell necessarily that it was renovated from, when you purchased it, it was hardwood floors, but you put in different hardwood floors.
Right.
Right. So it helps to give the appraiser an idea of the kind of work that's been done on the property.
Got it. And are there certain improvements that people do in their homes that you think are more valuable than non-valuable from your field?
Yeah, typically, I mean, it would be all the same that a realtor would suggest is, the first is the kitchen, second is the bathrooms. Mm-hmm. And then I find with older homes in Toronto, opening up the floor plan can make a big difference.
Yep.
But sometimes, when I say updating a kitchen, if you bought the home 5 years ago, mm-hmm, and you completely renovate the kitchen, you're not going to get the value back from that because you still have a fairly new kitchen, right?
Right.
So, yeah, those are the main kind of things, and just keeping the house in good working order, keeping it painted, and you have to kind of go off of what you think how the market would see that house if you were to put it up for sale at that point.
Yeah, of course, absolutely, that makes sense. Huh, yeah. Interesting. Are there any trends that you're seeing in the marketplace right now, based on the number of years you've been in the business?
Other than values going up, the bidding wars for building lots in some areas is kind of crazy.
Yep.
There's certain areas have really, really high demand just to build a new home. So you find a lot of builders going in, and even builders are complaining that they're almost getting priced out of building a new home.
Yes, that's
I don't know if you've
true.
noticed the same thing.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of my flipper clients some of them are starting to not become flippers anymore because they are now competing with end users who don't care if the numbers work or not. They just want a nice place to live. Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, the other trend that I've noticed recently is just there are more appraisals being done by banks. Before, mm-hmm, it didn't seem like with every single house that we sold or condo that we sold that an appraiser would be involved. And now it almost seems like every single deal that gets done, the bank calls out an appraiser. Is that something that you're noticing as well too?
It's hard for me to know whether or not I'm getting called out more often, only because my job's so assistant that I don't know if it's going to other appraisers. There's more work, so it's going to other appraisers kind of thing, because there's only so much that I can do, right?
Right.
But I do know that in the past, there's the banks have computer models that can actually do an assessment for the bank, and so they can use that as an appraisal.
Huh.
But I guess what's happening is because the market's so hot, those computer models may be less. They put less influence on it.
Right.
So that, So and it helps. I guess it helps the bank as well to have an appraiser come in, because it kind of protects them.
Right.
If let's say the mortgage goes bust, that people don't pay for their mortgage or whatever it is,
right,
and then they sell it in the market, but then they sell it for say $100,000 less, then they have somebody to go after. They can go after the appraiser and say, why did this happen?
Mm-hmm.
If you were doing your job, you would have appraised it at the right rate.
Mm-hmm.
So that may be the reason why there's more, but I couldn't tell you for sure. I don't actually notice it as much as say you would.
Right. So. Interesting. And then in terms of, sometimes I've heard from clients that, the appraiser didn't even go inside the condo, they just drove by it. Is that something that you've heard of in the industry, or is that something that you kind of think is odd?
No, it's not actually odd.
Okay.
So there's various types of appraisals that are done. One is just the normal appraisal. When I go to the house, I inspect it, and then I type a report. There's also a drive-by appraisal. Now that's like a more informal type of appraisal, where you drive by, you take a picture of the house, and then you look at the sale on MLS, you pull up some sales on MLS, and you try, basically you're bracketing the value. You're saying the house is worth between $400,000 and $450,000.
Right.
And that's that's, I guess they use that when they're not as worried about what the value is. Mm-hmm. They just want that extra little bit of documentation to help them out.
Interesting. Wow. And where do you sit sort of in the real estate camp personally? What part of the city do you live in, and do you rent or do you own?
I rent.
Okay.
I live at Wellesley and Jarvis.
Okay.
Yeah. It's almost like I've been watching the market pass me by.
Oh no.
And at this point. Yeah. Well, it's you always see, it's kind of expensive right now.
Yeah.
But then things just got really expensive. So I'm a wait and see guy now, because it's just priced me out for the time being.
Right.
So I'd rather invest my money for the time, and see what happens.
Right. Now, would you ever consider buying a place with a friend or someone? How some people could sort of buy duplexes together with somebody else as a way of getting into the housing market if you feel that you're priced out too much now?
Yeah, it's possible. I've considered it. You got to have I guess you have to have the right relationship with a friend if you're going to go for that, right? I got twin boys that are 1 year old, so they'd also have to consider how loud they can be. Right. Yeah.
Perfect. That sounds great. Is there anything else you want our listeners to know about the role of an appraiser?
I guess, there's lots of different things that an appraiser can be used for. Mm-hmm. Not only does the bank use appraisals, but there's stuff that you can get done for private work. Say, if there's capital gains, when you're renting out a property, the government needs to know what the difference in the value is from, let's say, when you lived in the home while it was rented out to when you sold it. I'm kind of going over that briefly so that we don't get into too much detail. So I hope the listeners understand what I'm saying.
Okay, sounds good.
Yeah, there's estate settlements. Mm-hmm. So when in the unfortunate event that somebody passes, an appraisal is used to divide the property. Yeah. There's also divorce. There's assessment reviews. Yeah. So there is different uses for appraisals. The majority being when there's some sort of financing, but there's other things as well.
Right, of course. And so how can people sort of touch base with you? How can people reach you? Is there a website or Twitter? Where can they reach you if they've got questions?
Yeah, They can go to